Sweet.
Attendee pace seems to be slowing. Why don't you pull up the first slide and 65. Great. Mike, why don't you pull up the first slide and let's kick it off.
Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining today. We will get started. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Michael Carvolis. I'm the Sustainable Innovation Specialist on the GO-Biz team at GO-Biz, the Business Investment Services team. I've been working with our Senior Business Advisor, Kaina Pereira, to do our business and community engagement around CHIPS Act. So as this funding came in, providing support to the hundreds of semiconductor companies in California. At this point, I will throw it over to Kaina Pereira and Poonam Patel on the GO-Biz team to introduce themselves and their role on the team before we get going.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this first presentation related to the state engagement portfolio related to the CHIPS Act. We're going to provide some background information, some expectations, and some information on how to engage with our office, as well as some resources that have already been developed, and give some more insight and understanding as to what the needs and requirements are for both state and local engagement. There's very specific asks from this program, which are somewhat outside of scope of a typical federal program. We want to make sure that you guys have the tools necessary to facilitate the actions from our business community and the needs of the semiconductor industry. So with that, we'll be presenting information related to the process, the current solicitation, what the confines of these solicitations will have, and our role in providing assistance and support to the organizations that are potentially going to be applying for this federal grant. With that, our typical services are in play, and Poonam will provide some information and background on how we provide those services, as well as give you opportunities to connect with our office. After we've done this presentation, we'll engage in a fairly active Q&A. Feel free to insert any questions you have during the presentation. We'll address those after the conclusion of the presentation, and I'll be able to address any specific questions you may have. Obviously, this is being recorded, and the recording will be provided on our CHIPS resources page in the future. If you want to look at that now, and as we're going through some of this information, that's business.ca.gov/industries/CHIPS. Over to you, Poonam.
Thank you, Kaina. And on that note, please know that you guys have a resource here at GO-Biz. We have a dedicated team, and that's where I can come into play. I am Poonam Patel. I'm the Assistant Deputy Director for our Business Investment Services team, or GO-Biz team, who many of you I'm sure are already familiar with. We have a team of regional specialists that are dedicated to connecting with companies and economic development partners across the state so that we can offer a tailored experience for direct engagement in incentive navigation and site selection. We'll go over those services in a little bit more detail later on in this presentation. Back to you, Mike.
Great. Well, with that, let's get started on just some of this background of what the CHIPS Act is and what it entails. I figured the best spot is to start at the beginning with just getting on the page. What is a semiconductor? We hear semiconductor, microchip, integrated circuit. For the purpose here, they're all the same thing, which are essential components of electronic devices. We have things like logic chips, which do processing, memory chips, which store information, mix signal. There's a whole array and slew of applications of semiconductors. Those applications include consumer electronics, healthcare, power sectors, defense, transportation. So, pivotal pieces of our technologies, of our infrastructure And that includes everything from leading edge technologies all the way down to technologies and semiconductors that have been around for a while at the mature node side. In terms of understanding the supply chain, this is funding that is applicable to the entire supply chain of semiconductors. So just to kind of once again get everybody on the same page, we speak from design all the way to the end use. So that includes fabless design, so where it's the software to design the actual chips, the fabrication of those chips, and then finally the assembly, testing, and packaging of those computer chips. R&D is a component of every single one of these stages. And then manufacturing equipment and materials stream into the fabrication and the assembly, testing, and packaging. So once again, these are dollars that are meant to boost this entire supply chain of semiconductors. So really the purpose of this act, it came from the fact that in the US currently, while we were the originators of the chip, we currently only produce 10% of commercial semiconductors. Our semiconductor supply chain is very geographically concentrated. In the US, we have a lot of the fabless design. However, we don't have much of the manufacturing here compared to some other countries. That caused a problem clearly during the pandemic where we saw supply chain disruptions. We halted commerce halted, it caused price increase. We saw for instance, like the price of cars jumped up, trouble securing a workforce to continue the development and meet the demand for semiconductors. So that's really where the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022 came through. So creating helpful incentives to produce semiconductors, chips. This is an act, an investment really designed to catalyze further investment in our domestic semiconductor manufacturing, jumpstart R&D, and commercialize our leading edge technologies and really onshore efforts back to the US. This includes technologies in quantum, AI, clean energy, nanotech, and also as a component of creating a more inclusive and larger STEM workforce to supply to these investments. There's an economic security play here, a national security play, and clearly a play for innovation. So once again, to underpin some of these points, we want to create a domestic semiconductor ecosystem that it goes everything from design to manufacturing and packaging. We want to make sure that we have capacity to build the most innovative leading edge chips, as well as have capacity to meet the demand for the current supply of chips that are needed. This funding right now, what has been appropriated is around $50 billion. And this is broken down into two different categories. The first one is for manufacturing incentives, and the second 11 billion is for research and development, which includes a National Semiconductor Technology Center, a packaging center, some new Manufacturing USA institutes. These dollars will be implemented over the span of 5 years. So not all the funding is out this year, although we know that a large amount of funding will be out this year, but keep that in mind that it will be implemented over a timescale. Lastly, every single piece of funding will include a workforce development component. So it will not just be, every single application will have a workforce development piece. So for the purpose of this application and for the purpose of the next rounds of funding, we're going to focus on the 39 billion for manufacturing and align our efforts there and provide some more information. So for this $39 billion, we'll see 3 rounds. The first one being for commercial fabrication facilities, the second round being for equipment and materials, and the third for being R&D. Once again, to bring it back to this supply chain diagram, the first round we're looking at fabrication and back-end facilities, so that includes assembly, testing, and packaging. The second round will really focus on those inputs, the equipment and materials. And the last one will feed R&D, which can go all the way from fabless design to testing and packaging. I do want to caveat that the NOFOs or the funding solicitations for the second and third rounds are not out yet. So we'll get more details as that comes from the CHIPS program office. But right now the NOFO for the commercial fabrication facilities are out. So for those facilities based off the NOFO, we know that it will fund the construction, expansion, or modernization of commercial facilities in the US. And as noted before, that includes leading edge facilities, so the most advanced technologies, current generation facilities, and mature node, which refers to established technologies. It also funds back-end production, which includes the assembly, testing, and packaging piece of this. So just to point out some of the program priorities dictated by the CHIPS Program Office, by the Chamber of Commerce. We really want to ensure commercial viability of these proposals. They want to meet our economic and national security objectives. So once again, onshoring, supplying our microchips to our most important sectors, including defense, healthcare, power, transportation. There's going to be a workforce development piece, so making sure that each proposal has a broader impact in its regional ecosystem, and a proposal for how it's going to meet the demands that the expansion will require. Speaking on what the funding will actually look like, it's going to be a combination of funding. The direct funding for up to $38 billion will cover around 5 to 15% of project capital expenditures. There'll also be loan and loan guarantees up to $75 billion, which are expected to not exceed that 35% of project capital expenditures. Also, I do want to note we are moving fast through this, so we will supply the slides after the webinar with the recording as well. In terms of who's eligible for the funding, we're looking at private companies, consortia, nonprofits, and once again, focused on constructing, expanding, modernizing through the supply chain, packaging, testing, assembly, fab, production, and obviously here we're focused on semiconductors. To talk about the workforce development piece, we're speaking on roles. Each proposal will have a unique need for what the type of workforce that is required for their expansion or for their proposal. I do want to make point that that includes everything from the original construction workers to actually build that expansion or build the new facility, and then a workforce to run the facility. And that's everything from entry-level technicians, equipment technicians, to advanced PhD degrees. So we're talking through an entire workforce to really support CHIPS and the industry in California. So the mandate requires that applicants demonstrate that they have secured incentives from state and or local government. The more incentive and more support we can show for each application or for the ecosystem as a whole, the stronger our applications and proposals from California will be. So the question is, what can these incentives be? What might they look like? So it's just some suggestions on what they can include. It can include workforce-related incentives or investments, once again, to ensure that there's broad talent pipelines that stream into your regional CHIPS proposals. They can include concessions with respect to real property, funding for research and development, investment in infrastructure for a specific project or for your broader ecosystem. So thinking about the supplier ecosystem and any of the shared utility or logistics to increase that production capacity. It can also include long-term tax credits as an example. So commitment can be shown in multiple ways. So it's not necessarily here are dollars, but of course that's an important pull and piece of this. But other ways to kind of also consider your support is things like expedited processes and permitting. So if we think expansions are going to require permitting, how do we expedite or make sure that those processes flow smoothly and that there's good communication channels between the proposals? Liaisons, so potentially having a point of contact to think about how do we assist in site selection, supplier discovery, compliance of our local laws, who is the touch point for this proposer. Integration, so once again, a way to think about your entire ecosystem, what are shared issues in workforce or infrastructure, permit navigation, how can we have a point of contact to bring our cohort together and understand how we elevate our entire ecosystem. Cooperation and collaboration, once again, thinking about your regional ecosystem, working with surrounding ecosystems to uplift a group of applications coming out of your region. So some of the overlying pieces here is we want to incentives or actions that help projects move quickly, incentives or actions that reduce project risk, and incentives or actions that promote regional cooperation. So I think as we've interfaced with dozens of semiconductor companies that are interested in applying for chips. So we want to be sure that if you have a request coming forward, what are your next steps, right? So we provided some of this information, and you'll have more information through the rest of the webinar. But what is the next step? So I think the first easy thing is engage with us. Let us know who you're talking to. Let us know what the proposals look like. Let us know how we can help. and throw them over to us the same way that we'll share applications with you, in the hope that we can leverage both state programs and incentives and resources, as well as their local resources that you might all be able to provide. So the way to do that, kind of mentioned, we have our business, our CHIPS resource page. So link is here and the link is in the chat. And once again, we'll follow up. There's a contact us button. So that's a good spot for you to send your local applicants to, so they can engage with us directly. Separately, if you have a point of contact, we're after this webinar, we'll share a link for you to share those point of contacts for us. If we're working with somebody, let's say in Alameda County, we want to make sure that we have your appropriate point of contact to shepherd that applicant to discuss some of the pieces and how you may be able to support. We'll follow up with those pieces after this webinar. Separately, we have a semiconductor newsletter available on that webpage. That's a good place for us to do this correspondence easily, let you know when we have upcoming webinars, share resources as we develop them, share new program details. So I highly suggest signing up for that newsletter. This isn't a thing that we blast every week. It's really as major information comes forward, we want to make sure we get it out in a timely and effective way. And then lastly, when you interface with your CHIPS applicants and you understand their needs, leverage your local partners. We suggest there's a workforce piece. Speak to your economic development offices, your workforce development boards, your educational institutions, your community-based organizations, childcare providers. These are all pieces that will be part of every CHIP proposal. And you, as you're inside of your local government or your local network, you have these contacts. With that, I will throw it over to Poonam just to quickly chat about the GO-Biz team and some of the services and programs that we have here that I know we've been asked about and likely that you all will be asked about. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. That was very informative. I learned new things too, so I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. As I mentioned, we really have a dedicated team that can help navigate companies through these different resource programs, and also as they are looking for opportunities to expand or locate in California, offer tailored site selection services with the help of our local community partners to find suitable sites for those companies. So that's our two-prong approach to assisting with economic development on the business investment services team. And as we are connecting with companies, seems like almost every day in the semiconductor space, we are getting a sense of their operations and activities so that we can help navigate them through the best resource programs that are going to help them be successful here in California as they are looking to grow and expand and leverage, as Mike said, covered incentive programs that the state offers to supplement and enhance their federal applications for the CHIP Act. So on this next slide here, I'm going to kind of break down our incentive programs at a very high level for how we are sharing this information to companies that can be in any stage really of trying to succeed here in California, whether they're starting up or they already have a significant presence here and are looking to expand, or are considering alternative state options to have their expansion efforts in competition with California. So when we think about these incentive programs and how we present them, we want companies to really get an understanding of their time factors. What stage are they in? Are they at their phase where they're doing a due diligence across different states to see where they want to site, where they want to have these projects happen? If that's the case, there are specific incentive programs that are more suited for those companies to apply for to help them make those decisions to have that project happen here in California. So we have a flagship program here at the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development called the California Competes Tax Credit Program. Some of you may already be familiar with that program, and that's really to help companies justify why a tax credit is going to be a material factor for them to be successful here in California. So we are advising companies as they are making their decisions and timing out those decisions to apply for this program sooner rather than later in their process of decision making. We also have utility rate programs, discount rate programs, if companies are looking to locate or expand in our main investor-owned utility serviced areas. So that's PG&E, SoCal Edison and San Diego Gas and Electric. We can facilitate that direct connection to those utilities. And we also have a role to play in that process of approving these utility discount programs for companies to get a discount off of their electricity bill for 5 years of consideration. So that can definitely help from a cost abatement end for companies as they're considering their options here in California. In terms of the sheer nature of businesses, hiring workers here, investing in equipment, we have a number of different other incentive programs that can assist there. And the good news is a lot of these semiconductor companies are already utilizing a lot of these programs. And so from a covered incentive standpoint, they can already be used to be called out in their applications when they're applying for the federal funds. So we have a lot of semiconductor companies that are already utilizing our research and development tax credit program. When they're going after purchasing equipment, we have sales and use tax programs that can help abate the cost of purchasing equipment specifically for manufacturing efforts here in California. And on the hiring front, we have workforce support programs in the vein of training grants that can be realized for companies to help with the incurred costs of training employees, building up that skill set that they need, which we hear is been a large issue for semiconductor companies here in California and finding the right talent. We also have a number of different tax credit programs as companies are looking to be more inclusive in their hiring and open to hiring folks that have been formerly disenfranchised by unemployment or former veterans or formerly homeless. We have a number of different tax credit hiring programs that can assist with hiring those specific workers if that's something that's part of the recruitment plans for companies to look into. And then we have a number of different financing options too, whether we're trying to set up a manufacturing facility, we have tax exempt bond considerations, and we also can support with loan financing considerations as well if companies are finding it difficult to obtain conventional financing from private markets to obtain loans. And the way that the state supports on that front is to back those loans or cover those loans to incentivize financial institutions to lend to companies. So through these different incentive programs, we're confident that we can help companies in different stages as they're considering California as a place for them to locate or grow or expand or stay. And in addition to these existing programs, we do have other programs that have been proposed in budget currently. So for the Cal Competes program, in addition to the tax credit, we may be able to get a grant program that can be used in the similar vein, but instead of a tax credit, be utilized for a grant for those companies who may not have tax or profit considerations for filing tax credit or are have overextended or utilized their R&D contribution on that front. For our hiring tax credit program for looking at disenfranchised workers, originally that program is designated to be applied for disadvantaged communities, but if the budget proposal for this program goes into effect, we would be able to open that for all statewide region considerations. So we will keep you appraised of how budget conversations go in the next months here. And to let you know if there are any other new programs that come online that can also be supplemented from the covered incentive standpoint for going after federal funds for CHIPS Act. I went through that really quickly, but again, just want to stress that you have a team here that is very knowledgeable about the programs. We have boots on ground regional specialists that can connect with companies directly to make sure that everything can be covered. And that they understand how to best leverage the state programs to assist them when they go after federal funds. Thank you.
Thanks, Poonam. With that, I want to throw it over to Kaina to add in anything else before we open up for just general questions and answers that you might all have.
Thank you so much. And I see some questions pouring in, so this is great. Obviously, we'll be able to take some live questions as well. I'm going to start off by answering some of those that came into the Q&A. But I really want to solidify what both Mike and Poonam presented earlier, which is that we're a resource for both you and the companies, and we're aiming to align both state prioritization, funding, and resources, along with the liaison services that are required for the applications, along with our local jurisdictions, to ensure that California gets as much of the manufacturing incentive opportunity as possible. So with that, I'll dive into the first question, which is from an anonymous attendee. Any idea of how much of the 39 billion is going to California specifically? There is no directive for monetization to go to any specific locality, as this is an application-based set of applications. The 3 different rounds are going to have no specific earmarks in terms of the amounts of dollars that are going to be provided through these programs, or to which jurisdictions or elements that there will be. Since it's going to be based on a rolling application over 5 years, we do expect there to be a number of applications to come from California companies, but in order to determine some specificity as to the amounts that would be provided to our organizations, that is as yet unclear. I would say that the first tranche is probably where California companies will be a little less engaged, as these are typically the large fabrication, large facilities that are inducing on the manufacturing side. In relation to the second question that we had in the queue, which is, do we have any sense of California entities applying for funding at this point? And so in phase 1, we have had some interest, but not a ton of measured interest. I believe that if we were going to have additional phase 1 applicants, they would probably come in the outside years. So not this initial application window, but potentially in future windows as they become available over the 5-year term of this program. As far as the second portion of the second phase, which is more geared towards materials and equipment and the fabricators of those items, we do expect a number of California applications, both on new critical minerals or materials in the supply chain, as well as those who are producing and fabricating the equipment that is necessary to make the semiconductors. There have been a couple announcements that have been made publicly from California entities who are intending on applying for specific stuff. And we will reach out to those communities that we know of with active applications in place to try and shore up some of those expectations. So at this point, where we see the predominance of interest is going to be around phase 3. Phase 3 is focused on research and development. It is definitely where California's innovative landscape takes hold, and is an opportunity for a lot of the companies that are in our network, of which there are over 600 in the semiconductor and microelectronic space. And they are centered all over California. In addition to the Bay Area and LA, as you would expect, we have active project engagements in San Diego, in the Sacramento region, the Central Valley, and the Central Coast, as well as those in entities in the Bay Area and Los Angeles. And so we are expecting a number of applications for phase 3 and have been facilitating both consortia dialogues as well as individual company dialogues in relation to that funding imperative. So I know that we're giving a lot of information and we're trying to get this through as quickly as possible, but also we will provide the recording on our website, just an answer to another question that we had. It will be provided on our website, most likely in the publication space. But if you want to see the information that is currently available, that is again at business.ca.gov/industries/chips. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the next question. So this is from Mr. Wyden. And to what degree is funding and other support also available to EU-based semiconductor companies expanding to the West Coast? For example, some Netherlands companies have a lot to offer, which would be in support of the CHIPS Act goal. This is a very critical question, as the program does rely on a national security imperative. And so the CHIPS Act and the CPO has released specific information as it relates to international engagement. And in one of those fact sheets, I'll go ahead and populate that into the chat too, so you can access it immediately. It is going to be reviewed on a national security basis. And so in that sense, and I'll drop this link into the chat really quick. Oh, I can only send it to host and panel. So I'm going to answer the live. I'm going to type this answer into his request, and you should hopefully be able to see the link in the answered sections of the Q&A. As such, because this is a domestic supply chain and resilience program, I expect and I would assume that there will be a very significant play on implementing safeguards for national security, in addition to what we would normally consider on the CFIUS basis. Thinking about, international exposure, obviously our EU participants, if they are not adversarial, are more likely to be successful in cross-jurisdictional engagements with the US on development of these types of priorities and projects. But again, I think that there's going to be a potential one-off basis in some of these reviews and seeing where their structural impact or connectivity to some of our adversarial entities may be. And so while I would be remiss to give you specific details onto any engagement related to that specific client, there could potentially be some challenges that would need to be addressed. Okay, looking through some additional questions, trying to pull out the ones that I think will be most beneficial for the wider audience and everybody. We have a question on the 5-year implementation phase. For example, for the material submission that is going to be open in spring of 23, will there be any application period each year? It is our expectation. This is from Stephanie McConnell. There is our expectation that these applications will be rolling and competitive in some respect. And so you'll see active windows like the one that is for phase 1 that is now. Phase 2 is expected in sometime in the next, I believe, couple months. And then phase 3 is expected sometime in the fall. Our understanding as of now is they're standing up these programs. There will be some iteration. There will be additional FAQs coming out as they explore the letters of intent that have been required on phase 1 and in determining the optimal output of both the tax credits, the loan guarantees, and potentially the direct injection of grants. It is our understanding as well that a sizable portion of the first round or first phase will be centered around tax credits versus the grant obligations. Okay, we have another question in here from Phil Herrera related to what is the best way for entities that supports workforce development to make their services known to applicants as potential partners. So those that are supporting workforce development in your communities can reach out directly to these organizations. They may have more significant challenges on localization of CTE. And one of the areas that we know there is a distinct need across the industry, across the landscape, and across the country is on development of more technical expertise. Less so from our understanding of our engagements on the engineering side or the postdoctoral side, but more on the career technical types of positions. We know that the gaps in terms of production or facilitation of some of the next innovative areas is going to be reliant on shared workforce opportunities or use of equipment on either UC campuses or other shared assembly type or pre-development type opportunities. And so there may be ways to tie in both with the community college network using, potential multiple employer contracts under ETP. A lot of these companies, we expect to have a workforce component that they would either want to try and channel through a community college on the CTE side, or through ETP in a multiple employer contract or a single employer contract, depending on what their needs and the size of the project is. I expect there to be multiple types of engagement in relation to workforce development. One of the key areas in phase 1 that was illustrated on the ask side. So if a company comes in their application and asks for over $150 million in benefits, there is a requirement for child care services to be a portion of the project. And child care services and supportive services and workforce development services are across the board as needs for this industry and for really all industries across not just California, but across the nation. And as such, I would expect that most of these organizations don't have a great tie-in to their workforce boards currently. From our engagements that we've had at this point, this is often the first time that they've ever had to deal with local or regional or state or federal government liaisons in order to facilitate expansions to their operations. Typically, these guys are bootstrapped or they are, induced with capital from the venture capital market. In this case, because we're trying to re-solidify what was, 20, 30 years of offshoring and trying to accelerate those channels, the incentive game is definitely live and well. Let's see, what else we got? Oh, wow, there's a bunch more coming in. Let's take this one. Can a municipality apply for the CHIPS grant? Is there an application link? No. As a part of a consortia, you could be included in some of the work that the applicant is doing. However, the restrictions for the applications themselves as it relates to the manufacturing incentives are for companies, consortias, and nonprofits that could potentially facilitate actions in fabrication of semiconductors and microelectronics.
If you are interested in seeing that solicitation, that is all available at chips.gov. I'll put the link in the chat now.
Thank you. Can GO-Biz endorse applications for CATFA, ETP, apprenticeships, funding, et cetera, from employees who will be applying for the CHIPS Act? I would say that what we're going to be doing is not necessarily an endorsement. However, we have been providing what we're considering a prospectus to companies to include in their application, illustrating the potential incentives that could be attributed to their project should they be successful through the application phases. One of the issues that we are contending with as a state is the labeling of covered incentives. And from our understanding and from our dialogues with the CPO, there are certain specific active programs that are considered, but they must be awarded to be considered covered. And so what we'll be doing is working with the organizations and the companies to first develop and put in their applications, both federally and with our state programs, illustrate the importance of these in terms of the potentiality for federal award and alignment. And so I wouldn't say we would be directly endorsing. However, we are providing the critical layers of support relegated and necessitated by the federal application itself. And so with each of these applications, we will be providing feedback and guidance on both what the award potentiality would be to the CHIPS program office, as well as when awards are stipulated and given to provide that information to the CPO for their final review. Our expectation is that these reviews will take a substantial amount of time in this first tranche because, one, they're trying to formulate the program's design and imperatives, and also trying to maximize the benefit of the allocations over the 5 years. So in terms of direct endorsement, likely not in the sense that you might be asking. However, there is definitely some inducement that we will be doing in trying to facilitate the grants and facilitate the applications. Let's see, I skipped over a couple. Are there incentives or ways to reduce this cost? And the cost in question in this respect is water demand. There are a number of water programs that are available at the state level, which could be attributed to local jurisdiction, which we would be happy to work with your organizations to help induce those actions. I would also say that we're going to see different needs and different challenges from different jurisdictions as the projects become more obvious or known, or the applications have come into place. And so in that sense, we'll work directly with your organizations as to how we can help facilitate the needs of both the applicant and of the community. Okay. How am I doing there, Mike?
We're good. We have 20 more minutes and a few more questions. I was going to throw, does size of workforce matter? Are small OSAT companies with a small initial workforce eligible?
Oh, yeah. So the size of the workforce is not a requirement within the confines of the guidelines of the applications. So I would say no. I think the critical piece is, what is its role in the ecosystem? is its uniqueness something that creates a competitive imbalance that helps California or helps the nation achieve our national security interests? For example, we've met with a company that has 6 employees. They are intending on applying. They feel as though their materials or process is instrumental in a new form of national or critical national security and defense. That is their play. Now, whether or not they're successful, I have no insights on. However, I do think that, me being a non-engineering person and seeing potential value in that application, we are providing support for the application. We're providing support for the company. So we have a timing question on submitting SOI, statement of intent, for phase 2 and phase 3. I don't believe that they have announced that yet as to the timing, but if it tracks similarly to phase 1, we would expect that the release of the information for phase 2 to come out in probably about a month, maybe less. And then from that, it will have detailed timings as to all of those requirements. In relation to the first CHIPS Act opportunity, that release was February 28th. It's signaled the timing for each of the imperatives, which included the statement of intent, which I believe is due or started to be accepted last week. Okay. Another similar question related to water issues. I think, again, in this sense, we would probably need to know more specifically what you have a need for or what potential impacts we need to start planning for in reference to some of these deployments. Again, knowing that it's a 5-year program, if we have these dialogues early, we can identify opportunities, then maybe there's a way for us to be a little bit more prescriptive or attractive to some of the larger scale deployments that are possible. So thank you for that question, Ms. Potter.
Kind of throw you to a question from Karina. Does applicant need to provide proof/commitment of local state assistance at the time of application?
This is a fantastic question. Yes. So within the budget, there's actually a line item that they're asking for specific on state support. There's another line item on local support, and there's a line item on the ask. What they're asking the CHIPS program office for, it is expected to be not just required, but they're going to want letters of support. They're going to want an understanding of commitment. And commitment can take many shapes, as we illustrated previously. One of the primary areas that they hammered on numerous times during the dissemination of the information around CHIPS Act was permitting. Permitting timelines, transparency of process, and insurance that these deadlines can be met. One of the critical factors for an expansion project to take full advantage of the CHIPS Act is that the construction must be begun by January 1st, 2026, no later. So if they haven't done pre-CEQA, pre-EIR, those kinds of things, we already understand that they're potentially under the gun on the timing potentiality, which is another reason why I think that there could be potential for adjustment to the program based on the transparency goals that they had as it relates to permitting. This is an insight I'm providing, which is not based on fact. It's just based on some of the dialogues that we've had with the office and understanding that permitting challenges are pervasive across the nation. What should I take next, Mike?
I will throw, will GO-Biz provide guidance to businesses on how to avoid potential clawbacks, national security guardrails of CHIPS funding, or is that up to the applicant awardee? So our role, yeah.
Yeah, so we are being asked to provide liaison services, to provide incentive navigation, to provide permitting assistance. When it comes to vetting, that is outside of the scope of our office, and it is something that will be done based on national security provisions as outlined in that white paper. That being said, our role is to facilitate potentially or to facilitate applications and to try and plus them up in the way that will be most beneficial for California and for our job seekers. So we will be happy to engage with the companies and try and do our best in facilitating the dialogues necessary to understand the national security implications and guardrails. and hopefully be able to connect them directly with both our CHIPS program office counterparts and any other counterparts they need to get better explanation as to those potential pitfalls. But at this time, we are not in a position to do any pre-vetting or to do any understanding, or to understand what the national security implications would be. Our perspective is that facilitation of job creation is the mantra of the day, and we're hopeful that we can continue propelling some of these applications towards that aim.
Kind of question from Philip Pereira. There's been lots of chat about DEI being a critical part of the CHIPS Act applications. Will GO-Biz provide any recommendations on what may be required from employer applicants?
I think that DEI is obviously a critical stance of both this current administration and the Newsom administration here in California. All of our programs on the state side have been aligned with DEI principles for the past, since I've been around, and we've been implementing those types of efforts across the board. To see the federal government align very specifically with some of our actions is I would say, a distinct positive, one for how we organizationally provide our programming. And so since DEI and really impacts of equity are a mandatory provision of our programs, the alignment under the DEI principles are very sound. I would also say that reflective of the needs across the country is that the diversity that is present in California is actually outsized to those in other applicant areas. So would we provide recommendations? I don't know if the word recommendation is the right word, but I definitely think that we can provide some insights into workforce concentration, availability. In our website right now, we have LMID studies that go by geolocation and MSA to illustrate the diversity parameters of current job seekers or current job skills within the classifications associated with semiconductors and microelectronics. And that is, I would say, a decent tool for getting a good understanding of where the relevant scope of employment opportunities are within your territories and potentially for those applications. Now, in terms of focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion as part of workforce parameters, we would definitely expect and hope for ways for us to see what the optionalities that the businesses and the applicants are providing, and definitely would provide some additional resource opportunities or ways to plus up both the section, the understanding, and eliciting some of the information related to our ETP programs, our workforce development boards, as well as the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, which all have these elements included. Hopefully that was a deep enough answer for future questions I know are going to come around a lot of these things, and we hope to work with you on trying to get and develop your strategies in conjunction with ours and providing additional information as needed.
Thank you.
Cool.
I want to add that before this ends, we will have another webinar, a second part on April 11th next week, co-sponsored with SEMI, and we will have a counterpart from labor present there. So we can chat on some of these pieces, some of these DEI pieces, and some of these mapping and data exercises that kind of has alluded to. So for more details, I would definitely recommend tuning in there.
Great, thank you so much. The power question. This is a great question from Mr. Harrington. How do we ensure that we have ample power to compete in this and any advanced manufacturing play? This is obviously an issue that we have all been dealing with in terms of power generation, power availability, sequencing of the economic development prioritization, and the like. We are in active negotiations and conversations with all of the IOUs related to CHIPS Act needs. That being said, we understand that this is something that is critical in more than just this space. We also understand that this is something that we've been having difficulty trying to shore up the understanding and expectations around deployment of power projects across the state. And we do know that semiconductor manufacturing is a power and water intensive project. For more specific types of jurisdictional elements or jurisdictional plays, I'd love to get into more detail onto what your specific needs are. However, I would say that we have been talking with both the major IOUs on how are we going to ensure that these applicants can moderate their timeframes and understand the time commitments that are necessary on both the maturation and the acquisition of the required elements. In some cases, there will be substation builds that are needed for the larger style deployments. At this point, and given our current discussions and dialogues with companies in the space, Most are not engaging in massive expansions that will require megawatt increases to a substantial degree. Now, that being said, other projects may come to the fore over the next few years that will have that. And so I would appreciate an opportunity to dialogue around future resource needs anyway, knowing that future economic development projects will have the same kinds of issues come up. So with that, we also have just recently created the Energy Unit, which is fostering communication amongst the renewable energy plays and our ability to service and develop the renewable energy needs for the 2040 and 2050 imperatives, as well as trying to increase both our organizational work through on economic development prioritization for power-related projects across the state. It's a really challenging area that we are spending a lot of time trying to figure out what the best levers of inducement for action are, and would love any insights you guys have. I know we've talked to a number of our communities about the power challenges and hope to provide some feedback and operational efficiencies in the future. But those dialogues are still ongoing.
Thanks, Kaina. I will throw over Jennifer's question, which has there been any further discussion on where the 3 additional Manufacturing USA institutes will be located? Will any be in California? And perhaps you can just chat a little bit more about R&D programs in general and what we know, since we haven't touched too much.
Yeah, so the $11 million that's in the R&D portion is carved out to 5 specific entities. One of those is Manufacturing USA institutes. There are currently a few in California, I believe 3. The intent of the program is to leverage an existing operation where possible. That's so that way they can maximize the protection of taxpayer dollars. And so we do expect at least one of the existing MFG USA facilities to put in an application. Will be helping and fostering that application along as well. Okay, so my position and the position from our office to both the governor's office and to the CHIPS program office is that California is where this industry was created, where it is birthed, where it is expanded, where innovation still is, and still the predominant of patent creation and patent applications are done here. Why we would not be considered for all of the research institutions is an asinine question to me. So for our intents and purposes, we will be applying for all of them. Period. Full stop. All right. Oh, you wanted more background on the remaining research parameters. So the other 4 are, one is NIST, one is NISC, one is the packaging, and then the final one is, I forget now. But in terms of concentration of those opportunities, I think obviously we are the center of semiconductor research, and it's my expectation that we will make a very distinct play for the major center, which would be the hub to the spokes. And then as far as packaging, where packaging becomes a really critical issue is on the national security side, where you're talking about things that go into aerospace and defense equipment, that go into national security telecommunications equipment, that go into our 5G and satellite type of equipment. Those types of packaging imperatives are going to be very, very localized, I believe. That is another area where I think we have an outsized play and a possible commitment that can be made very easily. In one of the areas of the state that has this concentration is really in the Southern California region. As far as the research development, prefab, we're finding a large concentration, obviously, in the Bay Area and the Central Coast, and trying to create consortia around those as well to solidify the research dollars in a more appropriate way.
Sure. Thanks, Kaina. I know we have a few minutes left, so I think with that, it looks like there's not many other questions streaming in at this point. I just want to follow up that post this, you will all be getting some of the resources that we mentioned here, the recording, some of these slides just to reference back. And then once again, the best way to reach out to us and start this connection early, as this process is just getting under wing with 5 more years ahead of us.
So thank you all for joining us. There's more information to come. Should you need to directly connect with any of us, obviously you could do it through the website, through the Contact Us feature. You can also go to CalBiz, CALBIS, @gobiz.ca.gov and send us an email. or hit us up on the line. I will also say that more information will be presented as phase 2 comes online. We will be updating the website as additional information related to the workforce components or the needs for childcare come online. We will provide that information as well. If you would like to dialogue on some of the more specific questions that were put into the chat or the Q&A and feel you need to reach out immediately, please do so. We are actively engaged in dozens of conversations with companies. I can say that many of, and we'd be happy to try and make sure that everybody has the right connective tissue on all these types of engagements. And then finally, just another plug for April 11th, which is our SEMI Foundation GO-Biz presentation on the CHIPS Act and how the state is going to be providing supports to specific entities and companies. This one is going to be populated by a lot of the companies. We are hopeful that the registration is strong. It seems to have been in the past, and obviously SEMI being the national leader on semiconductor as an institute and as a collaboration is one of those entities that we're very hopeful to bring additional information to the masses. So thank you all again for the opportunity to present, and we'll be providing this information on our website probably no later than tomorrow if you want to review it again. Thank you all very much and have a wonderful day.